Hi there, welcome to the latest edition of the front page. The Whip affordability checks, Goodwood and Galway. Big stories in this week's show and big characters to discuss them. I'm not one of them, my name is Lee Mottershead, but my colleagues very much are. We have the Racing Post editor, Tom Kerr, our senior reporter, Chris Cook, and in Ireland, our deputy Ireland editor, David Jennings. Hello, everybody. Chit chat as usual at the top of the show, betting chit chat. Chris, did you have a win in Goodwood?
Do you know, it's the first time in ages, years and years, when I didn't have a bet on the Stewards' Cup. I feel guilty even saying it because, you know, out of respect for the great race, you should be getting involved. But it was just, you know, the weather dominated the week to the point where by the end of it, I was thinking, can you really be sure that any horse that you settle on is going to go through this? You know, I don't mind a bit of soft because that sort of separates them out. There's going to be horses that cope and horses that don't. But it was getting to the stage where it was hard to foresee who was going to cope with all of that. So I left it. And then, you know, of course, immediately afterwards, you're looking at the result and thinking that one was backable actually. But you can always fool yourself that way. I've probably saved myself a few quid. That's the net of this conversation.
I didn't. I backed Tactical in the Stewards' Cup, thinking he was a big chance for the Camacho steeple. So that wasn't successful. But at the draw on Thursday morning, I did pick the number for the runner-up, Apollo 1.
You never.
I did, yeah.
Now, how did they ask you why?
Basically, I was the one that was available. I had no relationship at all with the trainer. There was no emotional depth to it whatsoever.
You just a passerby?
Yeah, and I was told just pick the highest number available. Excellent. And at that point, I picked the highest number available. So I can't necessarily claim that it was an inspired performance, but I do think my hand, to an extent, was on that.
What percentage of the prize money did they agree to give you?
As yet, there has been no...
Box and milk tray?
No. I mean, I'd settled, to be fair, for a packet of fruit pastels. I'm not proud.
I think you need an agent, mate.
Yeah, I do.
That was like 70,000, wasn't it, for second place?
Was it really? Got to be at least 5%. Moving on, how's your punting, Tom?
Goodwood's a bit of a graveyard for my punting pound, to be honest, so I don't tend to bet that much there. But obviously, last week, Paul Keeley had an unbelievable week, and I kept thinking, I've missed the Keeley boat. There's no point starting to board the Keeley boat right now, and then he'd smash in another winner, and I think, Christ, I've definitely missed the boat now, and rinse and repeat, basically. So I mainly kept the powder dry, which is probably just about the only thing that kept dry at Goodwood.
Definitely.
But regrets, I have a few.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, Keels was on the Racing Post desk during the week, and he was regularly vocal and happy. It was good to see and hear. What about you, DJ? Good week?
Not too bad. It would have been exceptional. My whole week revolved around the Galway hurdle and a horse called My Mate Mozzie. And I thought it was written in the stars because my wife Aoife and my daughter Georgia just came up with my mum and dad for Ladies' Day at Galway. And I put her up on the rails. You can see her actually on the replay of the video. I put her up on the rails about maybe 100 yards from the last hurdle so she could see them jump on the last hurdle. And as they passed us, My Mate Mozzie just stuck his nose in front. And then they like whooshed by and I was like, oh my God, he's actually going to win. So then we went running to see the big screen to see, like, did he win? And he was third. So that was a bit demoralising, but we backed it each way, so it wasn't too bad.
Well, that could have been a gorgeous story at the end. It almost was, and there was a sort of happy ending, but in a seamless link, there could be good news for you if you take this Racing Post Members Club offer. Okay, time then for our first story, and Chris Cook is going to talk to us about the Whip. Chris.
The Whip. No, nothing to talk about on the subject of the Whip, is there? Well, I mean, this is going back a bit because the most recent discussion was generated obviously by Hookham and the King George, so that's 9 days ago now. But it was during last week that we found out the extent of Jim Crowley's punishment. He's getting 20 days and he had to give back some of the prize money. And then during the week we also heard from the BHA with some changes to the rules. It's just, I'm going to throw out some points, and we can discuss whether or not you agree with me. But I think basically the sum of what I've learned over the last 7 months is that, number one, the new rules, they were intended to improve general perception of the whip use in horse racing, and on that score they failed miserably, because I'm afraid the rules as they are and as they're being applied serve mainly to keep the subject in the headline week after week after week. And I'm sure it can't possibly have improved our reputation with people who aren't following the sport closely. Number two, the jockeys are paying a very heavy price for these new rules. We get constant news about these very lengthy bans and the totting up bans, which are even longer. They've kept a couple of very big names out of some major races already this summer. And then there's lots of other jockeys as well who don't get in the headlines, who've been also sidelined for significant periods of time. That is a highly regrettable situation, considering that the rules, we think aren't going anywhere near the objective that they were designed to achieve. 5 sets of patchwork changes to these rules in the space of 7 months. This is sort of chaos in motion that we're watching. If you had a mate whose car needed to be patched up as often as that, you'd be telling him to get rid of it and start again with a new car. And so then number 4, as you said in the paper today, we are kind of stuck with it. We can't really back out from this sort of strengthened clamping down on the whip that we've saddled ourselves with, because of course, the world is watching every time they moderate the whip rules to some extent to take the burden off jockeys, even slightly. You get a complaint from the RSPCA about how we're backsliding. Yeah. So I think really what we need is a period of, calm from a regulatory perspective. Just leave the flaming rules alone, bad as they are. Let us at least get to the end of the year, give us a space of time where we can see how they're working without constant interference. And then take a view, after we've given ourselves, a good period of time to see how they work. At the moment, I'm afraid that the constant tinkering with these rules is sort of getting in the way of being able to take a holistic view about the effect that they're having and whether we should be sort of making more significant changes than the ones that are occurring from time to time. Basically, I tend to think that one of my initial views was the correct one, which was that the rules as they used to be, there was nothing fundamentally wrong with them. The number of offences was sort of gradually in decline over a period of time. And we've got ourselves into a dreadful mess with this sort of wholesale change, which was completely foreseeable because it's only a dozen years since our overconfident regulators went in with both feet, made significant changes to the whip rules, and ended up with this sort of rolling disaster that lasted for months. And here we are again. It's just a sort of colossal failure to learn from our quite recent history. And you can already tell that, that there will be no accountability, because there's never any accountability, is there, in the regulation of horse racing. The entire rest of the sport gets punished from one week to the next for every little mistake. But no one is ever held to account, if our ruling body sort of drives the whole sport down a dark alley.
Not an entirely positive summary of where we are with the current whip rules. If I was praising what you said, to pass it on to Tom here, I would say that your point is you really don't like the whip rules.
I'm afraid not.
No, but you believe it's for the wider good that they are left alone now for a while, so we can actually judge how they're working over a decent period.
I think in pragmatic terms, that's what we're left with.
Yeah.
That's basically the only choice that's left to make. We do need to be able to take try and take as calm and objective a view as we can of them. And you need time and the ability to reflect and gather evidence in order to do that. And I just, as I say, I wonder that constant tinkering is getting in the way a bit.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Now, on the one hand, I'm one of those that, like most people, watch the King George, watch Hookham and Westover doing battle up the home straight, and didn't offend me at all. And I'm still not into that mindset yet of watching a big race and suddenly thinking, right, I need to now watch the replay and see how many times the winning jockey and the second jockey hit the horse. So that didn't bother me at all.
But I bet you would notice, though, if a jockey used the whip in an egregious way, in an unpleasant way, in a way that was detrimental to the horse's welfare, you'd still notice that, wouldn't you?
I made the point in my column today that I am far less bothered by Jim Crowley getting 20 days on Hookham, although I have real sympathy for Jim's position in that he outlined to me that he doesn't see the rules as a deterrent because he didn't actually know he'd hit the horse 9 times. And I believe him, because I don't think any jockey would use the whip 9 times knowing that one more would lead to disqualification. I just think that's too... You'd have to be an incredibly good poker player to do that. But I was much less offended by that than I was by Iqbal Khan getting 10 days for an appalling example of whip use at Killarney. But in a wider sense, we are where we are. The direction of travel is only in one way here. We did hear what the RSPCA said last week. They are, to an extent now, a discredited radical lobbying group, but they're still respected by a lot of people and their voice counts.
They're influential. That's the big point.
Thing, they are influential.
You know? Not on us anymore, but
not on us
on the wider public.
But on the people that watch programs about cats and dogs on ITV at 8:30 of an evening. And also, where we are going is now where everybody else is going. I spoke to the JRA, Japan Racing Association, last week, and they are about to tighten and strengthen their whip rules, having seen what's taken place in Britain and in other major jurisdictions. The suggestion is that Hong Kong is probably about to do the same. Yeah. So if we start backtracking now, we're actually going against the overall direction of traffic.
I think this is going to be a bit of a theme today. It's probably an example of well-meaning regulation done not very well.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a few issues from the top. They sort of bodged the whole issue of disqualification first and foremost, because I don't buy this idea that jockeys can't count how many times they're using the whip. In fact, I bet most of them do it just fine. And if they were going to get disqualified for going over, you can be pretty damn sure anyone who did it would find their rides drying up very rapidly indeed. But we had this idea that, okay, disqualification is going to be 4 over, and anything less than that's just going to be a steadily ramping up number of days, which didn't really address the fundamental issue that the deterrent for breaking the whip rules is not strong enough to ensure that people don't break the whip rules. Because if it was strong enough, then I don't think it would have happened. Yeah. And the idea that you can't count just does not wash with me, because if you're in the thick of any sport, you have to follow the rules. You know, if you're playing rugby and in the melee of it all, the drama, the noise, someone wipes out someone with an illegal tackle, they get sent off and they don't have any complaints. You know, that's just how sport works. And if you're too caught up in the moment to follow the rules, well, that's no defence. You know.
But it's one thing to call it a rule breach. Then there's the question of what's a proportionate penalty. And I think we've reached the stage where we've gone way past the stage, actually, where these jockeys are being punished for what they've done wrong. You know, the 20 days for 3 over. I mean, that
it's extraordinary. And I think for some jockeys who are not wealthy people, the idea of losing the best part of a month's salary for what is, I think most people would say objectively, is a fairly minor breach, is clearly, pretty.
Paula Muir was the one that I had in mind, on that subject. She's not a fashionable jockey. She sort of works really hard to sort of hold together her riding career, and she got a totting up ban that was like more than 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And in the height of the summer, and she's back now, but it's only a month until we lose evening racing. That can be career-ending. That kind of ban.
It is incredibly savage, and I think this is the point about well-meaning regulation poorly done. They've tried to square an impossible circle, because they wanted to say, right, these are tough new whip rules. They're designed to ensure that people do not go over the limit, but people are still going over the limit, and therefore they're then incurring massive bans. It doesn't look good. They're tinkering with the rules repeatedly. Yeah. It is a massive bodge job and a mess.
On the tinkering, the analogy that occurred to me was they're like a gambler that's placed an enormous bet, and now they're just furiously trying to hedge and running, in the hope that they can cover all eventualities. And that's why I'm thinking, somebody's got to say to them, look, just stop. Let's see how this plays out, and then a little bit down the line, we'll know whether or not this has been a good decision. I think I know which way it's going to go, but they've just got to let it play out.
How do you fix it?
Well, they've put us in a situation where that's going to be extremely difficult. But I think in the end, there's going to have to be a rowing back on the penalty front.
That'll be like
it should be done in one
sixth
go.
Rowing back.
Yeah, I'm afraid it will. But I mean, better a sixth that is decisive and hopefully takes us to a better place than a seventh and eighth and a ninth that kind of move things about.
But how far do you row back from, though? So how far do you row back to? So if the argument is that 20 days for Jim Crowley for breaking the rules in the King George was excessive, on the other hand, you've got Hayley Turner, again referenced in the column today. So she spoke to Maddie Playle on Maddie Meets and said that she got 9 days for using her whip 11 times on her first Royal Ascot winner, and she basically said that wasn't a deterrent. And in the same circumstances again, you take that. Now that wasn't even for Group 1, that was for handicap at Royal Ascot. So if 20 days is too much, 9 days isn't enough, then what are we going to say? 14 or 15 days, that's the right...
What you're wanting to change is the culture, and I think when you get to the very biggest races, it's going to be really difficult to do that just by punishing the jockeys, because the mentality, I think, among the jockeys is that when you get to the major races, the ones that you're in the sport to win, you win the race first and then you worry about the consequences afterwards. I think if you want to change the culture, you have to start involving trainers and owners in these penalties so that they care about whether or not the jockey adheres to the whip rules. At the moment, no, I'm not talking really about disqualifications, but fines, or just something that brings them into the orbit so that they regret it every time their jockey breaches the whip rules. Then you can hope that those people, the employers, who are in the influential position relative to the jockeys, are going to be telling their jockeys, look, for God's sake, don't break the whip rules. And at the moment, I don't get much sense that they're doing that.
Can't stop fining owners.
Why not?
Because it's mad. Like you might have a... So how do you have a fine that works for both Sheikh Mohammed and a syndicate of people in the local pub?
Yeah, well, that is going to be difficult. It would have to be relative to the value of the race, I suppose, or the value of the prize money that's been earned.
I just think you're going down a very messy route there, because you end up fining people who are a very small, finite group who are basically underpinning the entire sport.
If it's relative to prize money that's
surely it comes back to disqualification.
I think I really regret anything that changes the result on the field. We should be doing that as little as possible.
But maybe disqualification only for race purposes, and you have a separate betting result. I know that's another bodge. It's a bodge on a bodge. A double bodge.
I think we should definitely see if we can find a solution short of that. But you do have to, as I say, trainers are maybe going to be more influential than owners. Realistically, you're not going to come up with any kind of fine that's going to impress Sheikh Mohammed or make him get on the phone to Frankie Dettori and say, what the heck were you doing? But if you bring trainers into that discussion, then you can hope that they'll be saying to jockeys, for God's sake, don't forget the whip rules. Whereas, as I say, at the moment, some of them being, thoughtful and caring about the sport, they will be talking to their jockeys about that. But some of them will not, and they're not obliged to, the way things are. I feel as a sport, every time we face a problem in terms of the way races are run, the solution is always to punish jockeys more than we were doing. And we've got to the point now where they're bearing an enormous weight of race day regulation, much more, I think, than is justified or fair. And we've got to try and come up with some kind of more imaginative solution, because things as they are not working.
Rest, just for a second. David Jennings, you still there?
I feel like I'm in the audience and I'm thoroughly enjoying the show.
Yeah, it's like bringing back the Jeremy Kyle show, this. I think what we've seen is that the whip rules are not an easy subject. The fact that there's so much disagreement on this table, I think, underlines that it is not a simple thing to legislate. Have you got the answer?
I don't. It's so funny. Like, I remember thinking about this before, and I was a bit like Chris, and I would have said, it's a team, like it's owner, trainer, jockey team. You have to punish the whole team. And I would have said the same with non-triers. And I remember trying to pen a column on it before, where non-triers, it should be owner, trainer and jockey, all with similar sort of bans, and the same for whip rules. But then Tom's argument comes in then, and how do you police it? How do you quantify the amount of the fines for, as Tom said, Sheikh Mohammed or different syndicates? And then you have people who are in certain syndicates, and then they've horses on their own, and then they're in like a syndicate with like 40 people, and then they're maybe in another syndicate with 3 people. And it's like, it's just a mess. I think the whole thing is a mess. As regards to King George, I disagree with Tom a little bit on this. I do think obviously Jim Crowley knew he went over, but I'd say he wasn't 100% certain exactly how many times he hit the horse. Like it's the crowd roaring. It's you're in the emotion of the whole occasion, and it's like, oh God, is that 7 or is that 8? I can't actually believe that he did lose count, which in one sense isn't good enough, because you should remember it's only up to 10. It's single figures. As Tom said, in rugby or in soccer, if you commit a crime that deserves a red card, you're sent off and you have to deal with it. And it should be something similar in racing. But I do have a certain degree of sympathy for him, because I do think it was like that, Enable Crystal Ocean finish where, it could have went either way. And probably this is probably something that maybe people haven't said. I'd say hitting the horse actually did make a big difference, because he was responding to the pressure. And I just wonder if you'd have said, if both horses, here's a completely hypothetical question that we will never know the answer to, but if both jockeys had hit their horses just say 6 times, you said, right, they both hit them 6 times, which horse would have won? You wouldn't be certain that Huckham would have won. Maybe he would, but who knows? It was that close. So I think it's just a mess.
But then it's important, I think, to remember that I don't think these whip rules were designed as an equalising measure to ensure, a level playing field. They're designed with the welfare of the horse in mind and the sport's reputation.
Although you say that, but the BHA did reference fairness of the outcome.
Yeah, I think that was a terrible mistake on their part, because they haven't put anything into their rules that says that empowers the stewards to change a result, for example, if they think breaking the whip rules has changed the result. It's not like the interference rules where they have that power. They think, you've actually affected the outcome here, so therefore we'll change it. That doesn't happen unless you go 4 over. And so I think it's a bit of a blind alley to talk ourselves down. You know yourself. Some horses respond to the whip, others don't. And it can be situational as to which horse is in which situation. Sometimes a horse is given everything that he's got to give, and there's no point using the whip more. Sometimes in the case of Huckham, they're responding. But if we convince ourselves that the whip always makes a difference, and one extra stroke of the whip is an advantage that you should be punished for taking, well, then you're putting yourself in the position of having to criticise jockeys that don't use the whip 6 times. Whereas, as I say, there's lots of finishes where a jockey might hardly have used their whip at all, but and even if they end up on the losing side, I'd be satisfied that they've done everything they can to win. It's not the case that every time you use the whip, you're gaining an advantage, and we should be very careful about discussing this subject in a way that suggests that there would be an advantage.
Looking on the bright side before we move on, this was actually a relative rarity, wasn't it? We've had lots of big races since the whip rules came in, and I can't think of many where the whip has been a major talking point subsequently. We've had Cheltenham, and we've had Aintree, we've had Royal Ascot. I can't think of many occasions where
closest finish, though, Lee. Closest finish. Yeah. When it comes down to inches, that's when the problems arise, and it's the closest finish and the most thrilling finish of a grade or Group 1 race I can remember in 2023, and that's what I think the big difference was. Okay,
am I being overly optimistic and positive on that front then?
Well, the BHA said it's only the second time in 23,500 rides that a jockey had hit it 3 times over.
Yeah.
So,
and yet, we've been talking about it constantly, haven't we? I mean, that's been the experience. It's just come up again and again, the subject. So there obviously have been enough cases to keep it in the public eye.
But it probably is now time for to talk about something else. Before we do that, though, I would heartily recommend that you download the Racing Post app. Welcome back to the front page. We're now going to talk about 2 festivals, Goodwood and Galway. Cracking action at both. David Jennings was at Galway, and the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, you say cracking action at both, but probably cracking isn't quite the best way to describe the action at Galway. We had a bit of crack, all right. There was probably somewhere between 8 and 10 of the races, I'd say, that were cracking. Like Galway Plate and Galway Hurdle was fantastic, and then you've got you know, this whole kind of 50 to 80 handicaps. It's all sorts of everything, which kind of makes it quite unique in that, you know, on the same night, Willie Mullins can win a Galway plate, you know, a small trainer, somebody like Mick Mulvaney can win a handicap at a big festival. And I spoke to Aidan McGuinness in the lead up to the festival, and he said that's what makes it what it is his syndicates who have horses with him. It's all about Galway because that's the level that they can compete at. They can't compete at Cheltenham. They can't compete at the Irish Champions Weekend or anything like that. It's like Galway. This is the week where the middle man and the smaller man can actually compete with the big man. Although the big man still very much came out on top. Willie Mullins had 10 winners for the week, including the Galway Hurdle. I said Galway Plate earlier, apology. Galway Hurdle. Zarek the Brave was one of his 10 winners. And sure, look, I said in the piece I did a colour piece after the Galway Hurdle. Like, what can you actually say about Willie Mullins that hasn't been said already? Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous. Yes, he has the ammunition. Yes, he has the owners. Yes, he is the best jockey. But still, like, to come up with a plan of winning a Galway Hurdle with a 4-year-old, only one 4-year-old have won the Galway Hurdle in 40 years, Perugino Diamond, which people pointed out was probably completely aimed at that race and maybe ran in handicaps beforehand to have a nice weight in the race. But Zarek the Brave came in on the back of Grade 1s, ran in France, ran in Punchestown against Lossiemouth. And just another incredible training achievement by Willie Mullins. Great week at Galway. Crowds were up. It was 122,362 for the week, which was up a staggering 5,660 on last year, which, you know, in the modern day attendances that are sliding all the time everywhere, to be up, you know, over 5,500, edged towards 6 for the week is quite an achievement from Galway. And one thing I will say to Galway, maybe you mightn't have seen it over in Britain as much as we see it in Ireland, but the way they sold that festival was incredible. And hats off to Sinead Cassie and Michael Maloney and all the team at Galway, because it was almost to the case where you were sick of hearing about it. Like, it was everywhere. It was like, it was on radio, it was on television, it was, you open a paper and there's an ad. There was a massive supplement in the Irish Independent the week beforehand. They really did promote the festival and they got their due rewards out of it. And it just goes to show you, any racecourse or any festivals watching, when you actually do put in the hard yards, you do get rewarded with crowds. So, fair play to them. Great week, Lee. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
How much interest was there in the action at Goodwood at Galway, DJ?
Oh, a lot, yeah. It's funny, everybody says, and I know I spoke to Bruce Millington about this, he'd love if one year they were different weeks, you know. But Goodwood really does add to Galway, the atmosphere, and even the days where you have evening meetings at Galway. Like, it gets people into the punting mode, I suppose, beforehand when there's racing at Goodwood as well. Paddington, obviously, all eyes were on him, and just the weather over there was astonishing, really. I think Galway did well on the weather front. But Paddington did what Paddington does. It was a very big claim by Ryan Moore, I thought, to say that, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was along the lines of, he could be the best he's ever ridden. Bit of recency bias there, I'd imagine. But like, he's just a winning machine, isn't he?
He is. Chris, you were there on Wednesday. Yeah. I thought one of the most surreal things I've seen on a British racecourse for a while was walking out after the second race, I think it was on Wednesday. Rain is pummeling the ground, and there is a 3-piece steel band playing Love Me Tender. Don't expect to see that. You do expect to see Paddington winning Group 1s now, because he just keeps winning them.
Yeah, I guess.
He was pretty dominant again, down in trip to a mile. DJ referenced one of the things that Ryan Moore said there that could be the best horse he's ever ridden. The other thing I thought was interesting was
before we get off that, can I just say I thought I suggested to Ryan, are you saying he's the best ever ridden? And he was very clear that what he was saying was he's as good as any horse.
That's always
a little bit controversial for him to go beyond that and say he's the best ever, because then he feels there's a whole lot of horses that he's sort of relegating, and he doesn't want to do that.
So it's a good position for Jeff to train. Good choice for us, as good as. He also said to MV Magnia, so MV Magnia said to me, was that he got off and said something along the lines of, this could sound silly, but this horse could win the Arc. I then approached Ryan and asked him about that, and he said, I said that, did I? Now, I think he probably did say that. He could end up going for the Arc, couldn't he? Because,
could he?
If August Rodin doesn't emerge as a Prix de Triomphe horse, they haven't really got a huge amount else to go for the race.
No,
and
that's true.
If you are really, really, really trying to single out Paddington from all the others. You know, he's not just an iron horse, he's something different. If you had a horse who won an Irish Guineas, went up in trip to an Eclipse, went back down in trip to a Sussex Stakes, went back up in trip to a Jumbo International, and then won the... How many horses won the Sussex Stakes and the Arc in the same season? I can't think of any off the top of my head. It really would stand out.
The reason you can't think about it is because it's a completely mad thing to attempt. I mean,
this is sport. We want to see people doing mad things.
I agree, but I think it's one of those things that you say in the euphoria of the moment, and of course, as you say, they are always trying to think about new ways of marketing their horses. So, you know, one day it will be, this horse could fly to the moon, or this horse could solve the Middle East crisis. At the moment, it's this superstar miler could win the Arc. I mean, they know what they have. They value speed, like everyone else in Bloodstock. I really don't think that there's any chance they're going to try this horse in the Arc, knowing that the ground is usually as testing as it is. I mean, he can go in testing, but can he go 1.5 miles on testing against specialist 1.5 mile horses? I think that would be taking an enormous risk, which is not really in character for them.
I think you're wrong, Chris.
Oh, no.
Go on, DJ.
Tell me why.
I think you're wrong. I think he'll run in the Arc. I really do. It much will depend on what happens in the Juddmonte, if that's where he goes. But you've got to remember, his dam is Modern Eagle, and Modern Eagle's last race at Saint Cloud was 1.4.5 miles on absolutely bottomless ground, and she absolutely loved it. I think there's every chance in his pedigree that he'll stay. He's proven that he handles cutting the ground. I think Aidan will go for the jugular this year. I really do. He's obviously extremely important in every sense of the word. Yeah. But I think they'll do it. I think Auguste Rodin obviously had serious issues at Ascot. He has to bounce back from 2 of his last 4 runs have not just been bad, they've been absolutely awful. Save the Last Dance, if it was absolutely bottomless, will come into the equation, but she's very, very slow. And I think when it comes down to it, you're going, okay, what's left? Well, what's left is the best horse in the race who will handle conditions and will probably stay. And they'll say, oh my God, we just have to have a go at this. And Aidan does have a go at things. From the campaigning of Paddington, he does tend to have a go at, the as many things as he can. If I was a betting man, I think Paddington will go for the Arc.
Well, fair enough, but I think he's got an alternative that you haven't mentioned, which would be Emily Dickinson. Again, we're talking
Emily Dickinson.
Yes, we're talking about slow horses, but if you want a horse that will go through the mud, and I think she was robbed last week with this odd-looking Goodwood Cup. She finished really strongly in what was a difficult race for her and all the others to be second. Yeah. I think in an ordinary Goodwood Cup, she wins that.
On that form line, quick form wins a British Classic.
Well, but come on, it doesn't work like that,
Well, I've been. Yeah.
Are you being serious? Are you actually being serious here, Chris? Yeah.
Yes. That was my reaction.
Emily Dickinson.
On deep ground.
I'm
not saying she'll win, right? But you could throw her in there, knowing that she's got the quality to run on into the argument and maybe mess things up for somebody else's intended stallion. But I mean, they're not going to run Paddington in this race. He'll be at mile and a quarter, maybe. 1.5 miles on soft ground. They're not going to take that.
I'll tell you something, Chris. Even if Paddington doesn't run in the Arc, he'll have as much chance as Emily Dickinson.
We'll see. Your views on Paddington and Emily Dickinson's claims in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe?
Well, I mean, I'm just loving this debate, actually. Chris is very jaded, obviously.
He's not taking his pills if he's tipping Emily Dickinson for the Arc.
I have a different affliction, which is that I look at everything through the lens of a newspaper editor, and God, I want Paddington to run in the Arc because it's so fantastic to have this superstar burst. When you said earlier that the most surreal thing you saw at Goodwood was a steel band playing Love Me Tender in the Rain, I thought you were going to say Aidan O'Brien getting his picture taken with Paddington there, which Goodwood obviously had at the course in a very clever approach. Yeah. The name of this horse is not insignificant, actually, because he's got a popularity, and that extends also to his style of racing. Yeah. That will to win, the way he's come through from fairly unshowy races, the sense that he's a sort of underdog, albeit from Ballydoyle, and just his general constitution, he's building up this mystique, he's building up this legend, And, obviously it would be so fantastic to see him then test that in the ultimate test in Europe at Longchamp in October.
If you're talking about seeing things through the lens of a newspaper editor, let me just end this by saying, I think on St Ledger Day, we could be building it as the chance the first Royal Classic winner in 46 years. I think the day after, we'll be reporting on the King and Queen having had a Classic winner, because I am unusually bullish that Desert Hero will win the St Ledger. What do you think?
Yeah, I can buy that one.
Thank you. What do you think?
I'll go for it. Absolutely fantastic to get them involved, and it'll be great to see them if they're up there cheering on the horse.
DJ, I respect these two and their punting prowess.
No, you don't.
To be honest, I respect you more. I respect you more. What do you think?
I respect the both of them as well up until about 30 seconds ago. I think Desert Hero has got a massive chance in the St Ledger. Yeah, I just love the way he travels. I'd imagine Doncaster will really suit him. Yeah, he's got a big chance. As we said, bottomless ground, Save the Last Dance will be really interesting there, and she could go off very short if that's their route they take. But on, I think if it's a normal St Ledger, I think Desert Hero will bang there. Yeah.
This is fantastic news on which to end part 2 of the front page. We now have not such good news now. Tom Kerr, affordability checks and more.
Yeah, so earlier this year, the British government finally put out their white paper on gambling law reform. And obviously one of the most contentious, controversial parts of that was a proposal for affordability checks, which they sort of rebranded and they split into 2 tiers, a light check at £125 spend, and then what they call an enhanced check at £1,000 over 24 hours or £2,000 over 90 days. So that was early in the year, about April time, and since then we've been waiting to hear from the Gambling Commission, the regulator, about how they're actually proposing to implement these reforms, because there was plenty of unanswered questions. Last month, end of last month, they finally put out their consultation document, and we obviously poured over it, and there were 3 major areas of contention which we identified and which are causing a lot of concern for punters. The first is how often they propose the checks should take place. So they're saying that these enhanced checks, which are basically where bookmakers take a look at your ability to afford your betting, could take place as often as every 6 months. And they say this has to happen because circumstances change. Well, lots of punters would say, this is absurdly nannying. If I take out a mortgage, the bank doesn't come and check my pay slips again a few months later to check I'm not suddenly spending too much or that I don't have enough money to pay the loan. There's an expectation that one check is enough. The second area of controversy relates to the way winnings are going to be dealt with. The Gambling Commission proposes that for the purposes of calculating a net spend, winnings should only be winnings for as little as 7 days. Again, the theory being here that, well, a win doesn't always just sit there as winnings, it becomes part of your overall pattern of spend. Punters would say 7 days is an absurdly small amount of time to suggest that people are going to fritter away all their winnings, and that these winnings should now be treated as deposits. So for example, you win £50,000 and you're betting with the proceeds from that. Well, after 7 days, the Gambling Commission would say, no, that doesn't count as winnings. You need to go through an affordability check. The third area of contention relates to how the checks are going to be carried out. So the government said they would be frictionless, and the gambling minister actually wrote in the Racing Post early in the summer, said they would be completely frictionless. The idea being that you don't even notice that these are taking place. However, in the Gambling Commission consultation document, that basically shows that while the proposed method would potentially be frictionless for people who have a regular salary, for people who don't have a regular salary, for example, people who have high levels of personal wealth, who have a lump sum from a pension, who have irregular income, such as company directors or indeed pro punters, all of them, there does not seem to be any route to a frictionless check, and therefore they would have to go through the old approach, which basically means you need to provide access to your banking details to a bookmaker, and the most obvious way that's going to happen is by sending in your pay slips and bank statements. So lots of concern emerging from these proposals in the consultation, and we have had a huge response already from our readers who are understandably absolutely appalled by these proposals and what they mean for betting.
And a lot of them have been saying, haven't they, in those letters, that they just won't go through with the affordability checks. They just won't hand over their personal documents to bookmakers, and therefore they will walk away from punting and racing.
Well, indeed, I think, I posted a letter that we received from a reader, Peter Byrne, on Twitter last week. It really struck a chord with people, as it struck a chord with me. And it just sort of summarised, I think, what people think about these checks, and it's the sort of sense of dismay and bewilderment and anger. This Mr. Byrne, 70 years old, worked all his life, ran a very successful business. Now he's retired. He's got some health problems, but his life is basically watching Liverpool games and betting on racing. And now he's suddenly being told, well, in order to have a bet on racing, you need to start providing all of this incredibly sensitive financial documentation. To which his response is, are you kidding me? I'm not going to do that. And that is the fact. For most people, the idea that you would hand over sensitive financial documents to a bookmaker is absurd. Yeah. It's absolutely absurd, and it's insulting. Yeah. That one should be expected to do that, because basically people have been betting all their life. They're perfectly responsible. They look after their own finances, and now a regulator and a bunch of politicians, to be quite frankly, have said, no, do you know what? You can't be trusted. We need to have some sort of nannying, overbearing oversight. And what's more, it's going to take place every 6 months. It's absolutely absurd, and people are understandably appalled by it.
Chris, you follow the political scene, you're a big politics watcher. Can you see a route for the government and the Gambling Commission to backtrack on some of this? Politicians are always obsessed by going with the mood of the public. Is there a hope that the government will see that the mood among punters here is so strong that what they are planning to do would be immensely unpopular?
Well, there's always hope, and there is a consultation going on, and that's the only thing that we can do is get involved in responding to this and telling them. We can keep telling them that this is a terrible thing that they're doing and a total disaster, which will bring nobody any good. So we must do that. But I have no great hope. What I was sitting here listening to Tom, thinking how depressing this all is, I was thinking, number one, they're making a pig's ear of this. No surprise, because people who don't care or understand gambling tend to get gambling very badly wrong. I mean, we've seen this again and again over the years. It reminds me of, you remember the Old Bailey trial of the race fixing? Yeah, and absolutely. What a complete mess the police made of that investigation. And the police have made a mess of other investigations in the past that involved gambling, to the point where you sort of get the sense now that they just don't want to go near it. And so here we have, other kinds of officials making similar mistakes. So they're making a pig's ear of it. But number two, and what's so much more dangerous for us, is that you get the sense they just don't care. If this was to lead to the end of all legalized gambling in this country de facto, would they cry about it? I don't think so. I don't think they would regret that. I don't think they would see that as any mistake on their part. They'll just go, well, that's the end of something that I don't really care about and never have, and lots of other people don't care either. I just don't think, taken as a group, we're a sufficient lobby to make much of an impact here.
I fear there's truth in what you're saying, but I hope there is enough concern, certainly in political circles, about the impact this would have on two areas that I think do matter. First of all, ordinary people, they are voters who are being treated like children, and with an extraordinary level of sort of condescension from the sort of well-meaning but essentially overbearing bureaucrats in London that many voters sort of have an instinctive resentment of. So I hope they do recognise that just how unpopular this is. But the second group, which I hope does cause some concern for politicians, is racing, and what is going to happen to racing if these proposals go through in their current form. We've already seen that the impact of affordability checks as carried out preemptively by bookmakers has had a very significant impact. We expect the levy to be sharply down next year. Media rights payments have taken a significant hit as well. But if this goes through in this current format, I think the damage to racing could be truly, truly awful, because what we're looking at here is a set of policies which is going to overwhelmingly target exactly the type of customers racing has, which is basically racing's core audience that supplies a very, very significant degree of its earnings tends to be older and tends to have a high spend per person. And these are the people who are going to be hit by affordability checks. These are the people who are going to be hit by them every 6 months. These are the people who are going to be hit by the proposals on winnings. And these are the people who are not going to have a route to frictionless checks, but are going to have to submit their banking details to bookmakers. So the very group which is most vulnerable, most susceptible to these proposals is racing's core audience. And it's not just punters, it's also owners. You know, there are many, many owners out there for whom having a bet is part and parcel of why they are in the sport. And if they're denied that ability to do that, then they too could disappear from the sport. So the consequences for racing are truly profound. And it's very much to my hope that along with punters who are being directly impacted by these proposals, that the sport as well will rally behind it, recognise that its customers are being treated abysmally, and that the consequences for the sport will be catastrophic, and therefore do everything that the sport can to amplify their customers' voice with politicians, with the Gambling Commission, and ensure that these concerns are heard and hopefully acted upon.
One of the points that Chris, you referenced when you're talking was that it's often the case that people who don't understand gambling really don't understand gambling. The Gambling Commission is supposed to understand gambling, but on many levels, it plainly doesn't. I mean, the way that the affordability checks are set to be implemented, activated, and then worked through, as Tom highlighted, underlines that the Gambling Commission doesn't understand the way that punters punt. The Gambling Commission doesn't understand, seemingly, the problem gambling sector. And the Gambling Commission also doesn't seemingly understand what the real issues are for a lot of punters. There's only ever been cursory reference or interest in subjects like the restrictions that a lot of punters contact the Racing Post about. You know, the Gambling Commission talks about this legislation having the potential to empower punters, but if those punters can't have a bet, they're not empowered.
I mean, I'm speaking off the cuff here, so it's not something I've looked into, but I imagine people at the Gambling Commission are in a similar situation to people at the BHA where they're not supposed to bet. Would that be true? I don't know if you know the truth of that.
I don't know if it is true.
If they don't bet, of course, then they don't think like bettors and punters, and so of course they've got no hope of understanding them.
No, I think, you know, at the risk of making sort of sweeping generalisations, you can almost imagine how things unfold at Gambling Commission headquarters as a bunch of essentially sort of, you know, again, well-meaning but completely oblivious mid-ranking civil servants sort of sit around a table and they go, okay, well, what are we going to do about the treatment of winnings? And they go, right, well, it would be wrong to treat winnings as losses. But then someone else says, oh, but hold on, at some point those winnings should be treated as losses, because you can't just indefinitely treat them as winnings and therefore never again consider whether that has an impact on someone's affordability. And then they go, well, what's a reasonable amount of time to do it? And they go, 7 days. And they've all probably sat there, patted themselves on the back. How reasonable are we?
That'll work.
And toddled off, you know? But you can be absolutely certain that no one in that room has ever bet more than a £5 on the Grand National or on a day to the races. And I think that's the problem. And this comes across in not just their pronouncements on the subject, but also politicians. It seems to be a sort of a inability to comprehend that there's a type of gambling that remains responsible and healthy that is not a flutter. Yeah. We have this idea that the only type of gambling which is respectable or normal is a flutter. I have a fiver at the weekend.
Money that you're just throwing away, basically.
Yeah, actually, for a lot of people, this is a hobby, a pastime, a way of supplementing income. People, and also some people have a lot of disposable income, and there's just no comprehension or willingness to recognise that for these people, they're going to be absolutely sidelined by these proposals.
DJ, although this particular piece of legislation doesn't impact you per se in Ireland, the wider conversation around how politicians look on gambling is very much a hot topic in Ireland, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. We're in the middle of a proposed gambling regulation bill coming in, which the biggest effect over here it could be a ban on gambling advertising between, I think it's 5:30 a.m. and 9 p.m. And obviously racing channels like Racing TV and Sky Sports Racing have come out and said, well, our product wouldn't be viable if this comes in. So there are obviously various different parts of this regulation bill that are going to have severe impact on Irish racing as an industry. And I thought Tom and Chris made some really good points there, and so did Julie. Like, I remember, like, on that issue of, the only thing they understand is like, or should be recognised as having a flutter. I remember being over in Hong Kong and talking to, I always get his name wrong, but I think it's Winifred Engelbert Brezes. Lee, you will do a better job than me at that.
Winfried Engelbert Brezges.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well pronounced.
Good job.
And I remember having a detailed conversation with him, and his point, which was extremely valid, is we don't want our punters to be guessing. We don't want people to come and say, I love number 7, so I'm going to back number 7. So their website over there has so much information, like the Racing Post website does. And his theory is, if you can bring all these things together, you can have, track work, you can have weight of the horses, you basically compile as much information as you can into each race, and then the customer who comes on to have a bet has to analyse all this information and then try and come up with the right outcome, which is basically Tom's point as well, is that, like, there's different types of gambling. There is, a lot of people put a lot of work into trying to come up with the right option in a race, and that just seems to be completely misunderstood. Like, so it's extremely worrying for the future of the sport, and you just hope, like, it's something that we've said for so long, but you would hope some bit of common sense comes in from somewhere. Just something common sense happens in the not too distant future to try and sort out this mess, Lee.
Tom, that common sense might result from the people with power listening to the views of people who actually bet. And as we've been outlining in the Racing Post, it's certainly not too late for people to communicate with government.
Yeah, absolutely right. So the proposals are just that, proposals. And while affordability checks have been enshrined in the white paper and are going to happen, it's not too late to influence how they're implemented. And it's critically important that everyone who cares about betting, everyone who cares about racing, or even just people who care about your right to basically spend your money you've earned as you see fit without government interference, need to respond to the consultation. And you can do that by following a link we'll put in the description. It's racingpost.com/consultation. There's a link there that takes you to the Gambling Commission website. There's also some instructions on how to fill out the consultation document. In addition to that, people can write to their MP, and they can write to the Racing Post as well. We're inviting readers to get in touch with us. Our email address will also be in the description, because we want to give a voice to punters. We don't think bettors' voices are heard in this debate, disgracefully. And so we're doing everything we can to amplify those voices and ensure that politicians and regulators understand just how controversial and unpopular and damaging these checks will be.
Yeah, as Tom says, it is vital that your voice is heard, so please do not be silent. It's been a fascinating programme. We will conclude in a second by telling you who this week's front page winner is. But before that, how would you like to go to Santa Anita to watch the Breeders' Cup World Championships? You can by winning our competition. Okay, good luck then when you enter the competition. Time now to wrap up the programme. It is my job to determine who this week's front page winner is. David Jennings, thank you for your contribution. Excellent. As always, been a great week at Goodwood and Galway, as you so expertly described, and I was grateful to you for concurring with me that Paddington should run in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, and also for backing up my view on Desert Hero. So you've done a sterling job, but you've not won.
There you go. That's what you get for agreeing with the chairman.
The whip debate I thought was engrossing and absorbing, but I'm fearful that if I give it to you, it would look as though I was taking sides on what was, I thought at times, quite a difficult and friction-heavy conversation between the two of you. So I'm not going to do that because I feel I might need to bring in counselling.
Wait a minute. So you're going to give the win to your boss, the editor? Is that right?
I'm going to give.
How
That's
interesting.
a terribly cynical way of looking at it.
You're very
senior
jaded,
reporter.
Chris, honestly.
Very
You're very jaded. I always thought you were a very positive person. But.
Yeah, very jaded. And you think Emily Dickinson should run in the Arc, so you can't
Definitely.
really win.
Oh my God.
So in that case, the biggest story in town is affordability checks. Hugely important. As we said before, make sure your voice is heard. And that is this week's winning story. Congratulations.
I wish it wasn't, but...
Thank you. Yes, so that then was a particularly busy edition. I say thanks to Tom Kerr, to Chris Cook, and to David Jennings. I say thank you to you for watching. Please join us again next week, and until then, bye-bye.